The screen behind me was lit up with deployment charts and cloud migration blueprints, but all I could focus on was the nonstop buzzing in my pocket. I was mid-pitch, walking the execs through a cybersecurity rollout, when the vibrations picked up 3, 4, 5 times in quick succession. I hesitated. And I never stop mid-presentation, especially not one with this much writing on it. But something in my gut knotted up tight. I gave a clipped, "Just give me one SEC," and ducked out into the hallway. My phone lit up the moment I unlocked it. The first message was from my mom. "You're not invited. Rowan doesn't want you there." I blinked, sure I'd misread. But another message followed instantly, like the universe couldn't wait to twist the knife. "Plans have changed. Rowan feels like you've been making the wedding about yourself." Caleb's folks stepped in, and they asked for a day without drama. My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling. "Please don't make this a big deal. She just wants everything to go smoothly. We hope you understand." Understand? After I'd fronted the venue cost? After I paid for the food, the photographer, the tables, the damn champagne tower, over $94,000, pulled directly from my bank account? Every dollar wired with this quiet, fragile hope that maybe, finally, this would pull us closer? And now, I was being deleted. Scrubbed out of the very day I'd helped make possible. My eyes burned, but I stayed standing. My heart was hammering. I texted my mom one word, "Why?" Her typing bubble blinked. Then vanished. Back inside the boardroom, the air felt different, heavier, like I'd aged a decade in 5 minutes. I picked up the remote and wrapped up the presentation like nothing had happened. Pure autopilot. No one said a word. Maybe they noticed. Maybe they didn't. Either way, no one asked. That night, I sat frozen on my couch, those texts still glowing on my screen. My jaw locked so tight it ached. This wasn't just rejection. This was erasure. And for the first time, something inside me didn't collapse. It sparked. Growing up in our little brick house on Linden Drive, we didn't assign roles. They just landed where they landed. Rowan got the glitter. I got the glue. When a pipe burst during a hard freeze, I was the one searching emergency plumbers while Mom wrung her hands in the hallway. When Dad forgot to pay the electric, again, I was 12, calling the utility company and arranging a payment plan. "She's still finding herself," Mom would say every time I brought up how uneven things felt. "You've always just had it together." So I wore capable like a second skin, even when it chafed. Rowan breezed through school on charm and late passes. I stayed up rewriting essays and organizing binders by subject and priority. She spun through cheer practice like a Disney character, while I ran the science fair booth solo and filled out FAFSA paperwork in secret. By the time I graduated valedictorian, no one celebrated. They were just glad I hadn't dropped the ball. I left for college in Portland with 2 duffels and a quiet vow: I'd never need anyone the way everyone always needed me. 4 years later, I crossed the stage summa cum laude, already hired by a tech firm that barely existed outside of a WeWork address. I worked nights, pinched every dollar, and lived in a 1-bedroom with ceilings so low I couldn't stand on a chair without hitting the smoke alarm. When our startup got acquired, I woke up a millionaire. No Tesla. No Instapost. Just a bigger number in my account and the faintest breath of peace. That's when the call started. Dad's old Honda died. Mom's hours got cut. Rowan's lease imploded. I covered everything, not because anyone begged, but because I'd been trained to spot the cracks before anyone else did. So when Rowan called me, late one night, practically levitating through the phone, telling me that Nate had proposed on a rented sailboat during golden hour, of course I said I'd help. She sounded like one of those curated Pinterest weddings she used to daydream about. And I wanted it to be perfect for her. Back in high school, Rowan used to say she wanted a cozy wedding, something sweet and simple, she'd call it. But then she brought up the Langford estate, a venue I knew started at 50 grand, just to breathe on the property. "Don't worry," she'd added quickly. "Nate's parents are thinking of chipping in. I know Mom and Dad can't really help, but we'll figure it out. Maybe you could just help with a few little things?" And, of course, I said yes. No follow-up questions. I always said yes. 2 weeks later, during brunch at this overpriced farm-to-table spot she loved, she slid a spreadsheet across the table. It was color-coded like a war plan, and honestly, kind of terrifying. The budget? $120,000. Turns out, the little things meant the entire venue deposit. And the catering. And the photographer. And floral arrangements. Plus a dozen other essentials. "We're just waiting on Nate's parents," she said with that soft, baby dear expression she'd perfected since childhood. "They haven't committed yet, but hopefully soon." By the time I realized "we'll figure it out" really meant "you'll handle it," I'd already wired the Langford deposit and sent off the first catering payment. The requests didn't stop. The florist needed an expedited deposit. The designer dress Rowan fell in love with was being discontinued. The jazz trio Nate loved had a rare opening, but only if we booked by Friday. Every call felt urgent. Every message came with this unspoken undertone: "Only you can fix this." So I handled it. I made budget trackers. Collected receipts. Talked myself into believing that once the wedding was over, I'd finally breathe. That they'd look back and say, "We couldn't have done this without you." But somewhere between invoice number 3 and the 5th Venmo request labeled emergency, I stopped being her sister and started functioning as a quiet financier. A ghost in the background. Not in the pictures. Just on the receipts. Eventually, I asked the question I'd been holding back: "What's Nate's family contributing?" Rowan hesitated. "They're still figuring it out. It's just been a really stressful time." Apparently not stressful enough to cancel the spa weekend his mom booked for her bachelorette trip. It started small. A group chat I was never added to. A florist consultation scheduled during my quarterly review. A cake tasting I only found out about because she posted a photo and tagged the bakery. Every time I brought it up, she had a reason. "I figured you'd be busy. Mom could cover that one." It was super last minute, I meant to tell you. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. Told myself it was all just wedding chaos. But as the weeks passed, the pattern sharpened into something I couldn't ignore. I was footing the bill for a wedding I wasn't even included in. Still, I kept trying. Rearranged meetings. Took red ice. Showed up uninvited, hoping to wedge myself back into a planning process that had quietly locked me out. One afternoon, I stopped by a boutique hotel near Rowan's place to drop off some printed contracts she'd asked for. I grabbed a coffee in the cafe downstairs, and that's when I saw her. She was 2 tables over, deep in conversation with her maid of honor, Kendra. I froze the second I heard my name. "She's being such a control freak," Rowan said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Just because she's paying doesn't mean it's her wedding." Kendra sipped her oat milk latte. "Yeah, but at least you're not going into debt, right?" Rowan gave a little laugh. "I mean, small price to pay for her spreadsheets and passive-aggressive texts. Honestly, I just wish she'd send the money and stay out of it." I backed out before they could spot me. Hands trembling. That night, I stared at the Excel doc I'd built for her: color-coded tabs, detailed formulas, itemized timelines. For a minute, I couldn't even remember who I'd made it for. Her? The family? Myself? I thought I was being helpful. Supportive. The sister who always showed up. Turns out, that was the problem. And then, the following week, it got worse. I was halfway through our Monday stand-up meeting when a random text pinged through Slack. Buried between build alerts and bug reports was a message from some distant cousin of Nate's, a guy I'd spoken to maybe twice in my life. "Hey. Heard you're not coming. Hope you're feeling better." I stared at it, confused. Seconds later, another message popped up. "Rowan said you've been having episodes?" I didn't know things were that bad. That bad? My hands went ice cold. I stepped outside during my break and called my mom. She picked up on the 3rd ring, already sounding braced for impact. "Tessa, I was going to call you tonight. What did she say to them?" I cut in. There was a beat of silence. Then, "She just mentioned that you've been under a lot of stress lately. That maybe it's affecting how you're acting." Overwhelmed, I repeated, flat. That's the word we're going with? So instead of telling Nate's family the truth, that I paid for almost 90% of the wedding while being excluded from every major decision, she decided to paint me as the unstable one. She didn't mean it like that, Mom said gently, like tone could soften the betrayal. She's just under a lot of pressure. Nate's parents are finally getting excited about the wedding, and she's scared something might ruin it. Something like me, I said. Silence. I'm not the problem, I muttered, more to myself than her. The problem is she's lying. To you, to them, to herself. And you'd rather defend the fantasy than face any of it. Sweetheart, it's complicated. No. It's actually not. And I hung up. I stood in my office, staring at my own reflection in the blank computer screen. Something cracked open in me, not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. They were never going to see me. Not unless I stopped making it so easy to ignore meth. Next morning, I did the one thing none of them expected. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. A cold mug of tea sat forgotten beside stacks of contracts, emails, invoices, 6 months of work I knew by heart. Every receipt. Every payment. Every plan. Folders labeled Rowan plus Nate wedding were crammed with 55 planning files, all meticulously color-coded. I opened a new document and typed 3 headers: pending payments. Cancelable services. Non-refundable. Then I started breaking it all down, line by line. No emotion. Just logic, surgical precision. First up, the venue. The Langford estate. Their contract included a partial refund clause, as long as you cancelled 72 hours in advance. I dialed the coordinator, Stephanie, who I'd been emailing for months. Hi, Stephanie. This is Tessa Carson. I need to cancel the reservation. She hesitated. Oh, may I ask why? Because I'm no longer attending the wedding I funded, and I can't keep supporting it. To her credit, she didn't press. She walked me through the cancellation terms, confirmed the refund amount, and even offered to send me a formal statement for tax purposes. Next, I moved on to the florist. The DJ. The bartenders. The rental company. One by one, I undid every part of the machine I'd built. Most of the vendors were kind. A few of them already seemed to know something had gone sideways. Word had spread. You're not the first, the photographer told me quietly. But you might be the bravest. By early evening, I'd shut it all down. Cancelled every vendor I could. Collected every refundable dollar and transferred it back into my savings account. And then I turned to the shared planning drive, the one I'd built from scratch. The one Rowan and Mom and everyone else had access to but never lifted a finger to update. I downloaded everything. Backed it all up. Then I deleted the folder from the cloud. Gone every table layout. Every menu quote. Every spreadsheet. I closed the laptop and finally exhaled. I hadn't realized just how much space all of this had taken up, not just on my hard drive, but in my head. My chest. My life. For the first time in half a year, I felt free, and then my phone rang. I didn't need to check. I already knew who it was. The moment I picked up, Rowan was already yelling, "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shrieked. The venue just called. The florist cancelled. Everything is falling apart, and it's your fault. I didn't even flinch. You made it very clear I wasn't wanted, I said, calm as ever. You're ruining my life just because you're jealous. No, I said. Quietly. Clearly. I'm taking back mine. You wanted a perfect wedding without me? Well, now you've got neither. She broke down sobbing and hung up on me. 5 minutes later, my mom called. I let it ring out and go to voicemail. Then my dad. Then a flood of messages I didn't even open. One by one, I blocked them. Not because I was angry, not anymore, but because I needed to survive myself first. I opened a browser tab and searched for cabins on the Oregon coast. Found one buried deep in the trees near a stretch of shore I remembered from a college road trip. No Wi-Fi. No cell signal. Just silenced. I booked it for 7 days, packed a duffel, and left the next morning before the city had even rubbed the sleep from its eyes. No goodbyes. No explanations. By the time anyone noticed I was gone, I was already halfway across the bay, standing at the edge of the ferry, wind slapping against my cheeks, phone powered off, watching Portland's skyline dissolve behind me. There was no spite in my chest. Just space, just quiet, and as the boat drifted toward the coastline, something inside me began to loosen, gently, finally. A soft unraveling that had taken me my whole life to begin. The cabin was smaller than it looked online, one room, a little cast-iron stove, a scarred kitchen table that became my sanctuary. I'd left my laptop behind. My phone stayed dark. The silence wasn't hollow, it felt alive, like something had returned to me. Every morning, I wandered through damp trails that smelled of cedar and wet moss. By the second day, I started carrying a notebook, not the kind I used for planning or work. A real journal, blank and unlined. I filled it with everything I'd never dared to say out loud. I wrote about the time Rowan ditched my birthday. The countless nights I sat hunched over receipts fixing Dad's taxes. The Christmas I covered every gift while they all acted like they just showed up from magic. I wrote about what it felt like to be needed but never chosen. Reliable, but invisible. By day 5, I found a narrow trail that led to a small waterfall hidden beneath the pines. I sat nearby, tore those pages into strips, and let the river carry them away. It felt silly, and sacred. When I left the coast, the hurt came back with me. But it had changed. It didn't own me anymore. It had a shape now, and it was mine. Before I'd even unpacked, I booked my first session with a therapist. Dr. Kessler didn't ask for a backstory right away. She asked, "Who are you when you're not solving things for other people?" I cried. We started slowly, patterns, expectations, family myths. I showed up every week. I stopped justifying what I felt, stopped explaining who I was. The grief didn't vanish, but it stopped dictating everything I did. When the holidays came around, I didn't drive back to Millfield. I made new plans. My own spring came quietly. No lightning bolt of change. Just 1,000 small decisions. I changed my email footer. I left the family group chat. I stopped answering anything that started with, "Can you just?" I rerouted the energy I used to spend fixing everyone else's chaos. I funded a coding scholarship for girls in small towns. I started donating monthly to a conservation program in the same forests that helped me heal. It felt good to give, without being drained. Dr. Kessler called it emotional repurposing. She said I'd been my family's emergency contact for so long, I'd forgotten what it meant to belong to myself. I spent Thanksgiving surrounded by coworkers, most of whom burned the stuffing and laughed like it was a sport. Christmas morning, I sipped coffee in a house filled with friends, passing around cheap board games instead of expectations. In therapy, we drew it out on paper, the roles I'd been locked into. "Your family poured all their stress into you," she explained, and called it love. I nodded. I'd always known it, just hadn't had the words before. We talked about guilt. About how my parents had trained me to see other people's comfort as my responsibility, how Rowan's fragility had become the axis we all quietly orbited around. But I was choosing a new center now. One that didn't require me to shrink. I stopped keeping tabs. I stopped scanning their messages for hidden meanings or crumbs of affection. I let the silence stay, and for once, it felt like peace. Then one cold afternoon in late January, a pale blue envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, Talia, written in a slanted script I hadn't seen since we were little girls trading secrets under blanket forts. The envelope was soft at the corners, like someone had held it for days before letting it go. Inside, there was a plain note card. No floral design, no fancy font. Just Isla's handwriting, smaller now, more hesitant. "I owe you an apology. Can we talk?" That was it.no explanations. No excuses. I read it twice, then placed it on the windowsill like it might need time to breathe. 3 days passed before I texted her. Tuesday. 3 p.m. Juniper and Rose Cafe. She replied a minute later, "I'll be there." I showed up early, ordered mint tea, and found a spot near the back. When Isla walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. No styled waves, no tailored dress, no heels. Just a gray pullover, no makeup, and hair twisted into a bun that clearly hadn't been curated for show. "I don't know where to start," she said, once we sat. Her voice didn't wobble. It was just quiet. I said nothing. I let her fill the silence. "I started therapy in October," she told me. "Caleb and I are getting divorced." She paused. Not for my reaction, but like she needed a breath before continuing. "He didn't cheat or lie or anything dramatic. I spent so much of my life trying to be loved that I became someone else to earn it. His approval. Yours. Mom's. I told lies. Big ones. Especially about you. I kept listening. I told them you were unstable. That you couldn't be counted on. I needed them to trust me, so I gave them a version of the story where you were the problem. And you carried everything, the bills, the pressure, the fallout. All of it." I didn't feel rage anymore. What rose in me was quieter than that. Just an ache that had softened with time. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I just need you to know, I finally see it. All of it." We sat there for a while afterward. We didn't hug. We didn't map out what would come next. But when she pulled out a pamphlet for a teacher certification program she was applying to and asked if I wanted to see it, I nodded. We weren't sisters again, not yet, but we weren't strangers either, and for now, that felt like enough. "It's quiet in my life these days. But not the hollow kind." The dining table I built from salvaged wood sits in the center of my little kitchen, surrounded by 6 mismatched chairs. Each one filled tonight. Friends pass food around, swap stories, top off each other's wine glasses. No one asks what I did to earn my seat, they just make space. Across the room, Eli catches my eye and smiles, not the kind of smile that wants something. Just the kind that says, "I see you." We met months ago at a networking event I almost skipped. He'd asked, "So what do you do outside of work?" And for the first time I had an answer. "I host. I mentor. I hike. I write. I live." After everyone leaves, I clean up in the quiet, hands in warm soapy water, light spilling through the kitchen window. Above the sink, on a little wooden shelf, sits a folded cream card, ink slightly blurred at the edges. I found it tucked inside a thank you letter from a scholarship student I now sponsor. "You were never the backup plan, you were the blueprint." I trace the words with my finger, let them settle. For years, I gave up my place at the table and called it love. Now I build my own, and every seat here was made with intention, not apology.